Dead elephants.
You said it.
Final.
You said elephants.
Yeah, I know. By the fourth time I record, I'm good. Final week with Monica. It's great to have you back. Big topic. We're talking about pornography today. Could go a bunch of different places, honestly. I spent a long time, like in my early youth pastor days, doing porn talks. I became like the porn guy.
What a niche.
No, I listen, I think it's an important conversation, but I just hated being the porn guy.
Probably you were the only guy who was willing to talk about it at the time.
Well, I think the problem is that I would talk about it honestly. You know, like I talked about the fact that I went to an all-boys school and there was magazines for it everywhere and that I was just around it and it just felt like the right thing. And then it just took a long time to decompress from all those issues. And so I guess I have a real disdain for it and its prevalence. Got a young boy. I've had to have that conversation with him way before I thought I needed to have that conversation with him. So I guess, Monica, I'm just warning you, I bring some hostility into this.
Yeah.
You know, so if you feel like I arc up and get fired up about it, you just, pastor me into a place of calm and then continue on with whatever points you need to make. Okay?
Sure.
And we're working on an assumption that pornography is something you see often in your work. So can we start by just asking, is that true? Does pornography play into what you do?
Yeah, it plays into what I do. I mean, interestingly, it's not a primary, it's not as common as I thought it would be, which is interesting that I know that the incidence of porn addiction and use even is high, but how many of them I actually see in my clinic it's not the main primary thing.
Okay.
Which is really interesting, and even less so with females. Like I have never seen a woman come in to talk to me about her porn.
To be cynical, is that because people are being dishonest, or is it just perhaps not as bad as what we think it might be?
Well, I think that no. I mean, there is stats that say that girls are looking at porn. I think there's just so much stigma and shame and so not spoken about that it's really hard for a woman to come in and seek help, admit that there is a problem, and then seek help. That's my instinct, but I can't tell you why.
Okay.
But that's just what I'm telling you in all my years of working in this space.
So between those who you do see, even if it's not the main presentation, and perhaps other stuff that you're seeing in research and stuff that's coming out, what is the impact of pornography at this point on people and therefore more broadly in society?
Yeah, and I'm glad you sort of mentioned that because I think it is. It's an individual impact. It's a relational impact, and it's a societal impact. We're kind of it's this massive space, and I think for the individual, there are many issues that they often face around, some of the physical issues around delayed ejaculation, erectile dysfunction, even things like low libido, brain fog, anxiety, low motivation, high performance pressure from what they're seeing and feeling like they have to live into this, high levels of guilt and shame, a lot of anxiety around even FOMO, like you're missing out, like there's all this stuff happening out there, and which is obviously all entertainment oriented, but it's still a sense of I'm missing out here in my own relationship, really unrealistic expectations for sex, and even in what to expect of your partner, and their experiencing of it is really often skewed. And I think it's really, as I was saying, it's hard to know how much of it is a result of porn or how much of it is a result of something deeper that happens to be driving them to porn. Like if they've got a really low libido or they're struggling with that, they might turn to porn to reassure themselves that they are sexual. But in doing that, also create a certain level of shame that increases the anxiety that leads them back to that and pulls them away from the relationship. So it's sort of very mixed in. It's hard to know exactly what's at the heart and the kind of root of what is happening in that space.
And I would assume I'm all about going deep and, family of origin, like let's go deeper than the presenting issue generally about life. But I wonder whether with porn, just because of its accessibility, you actually don't need to have that much of a reason to become addicted to it, just because it's just right there in front of you.
Yes.
And you're addicted because It's there.
And I think, and that's the difference, is there is a difference between porn use and porn addiction that I think is really important to define. So, you know, porn use is and I want to actually share this. I came up with this the other day, this sort of framing and understanding I wanted to share with you, just see what you think. And I will in a moment. But there's difference between that and actually addiction, which is like, this has got some sort of power over me. I'm compulsively driven to using this, even when I don't want it. Even when it's having negative impacts on my life, there's something that I cannot kind of overcome within my life. So that I just want to define and distinguish those two, because not everyone who uses porn is porn addicted. But this is what I wrote. I said, if porn is like fast food, something that's not healthy for your body or realistic or nourishing, but something your body easily craves, because it's a shortcut to meeting biological criteria for survival, which we're all wired to kind of consume sexual content. The problem that we have on our hands is that with porn, it's like there is firstly the equivalent of a fast food on every corner, where the food is free and it comes to you even when you haven't ordered it. It takes a great deal of discipline and principle to hold your ground, as well as a willingness to put in the work to cook a wholesome meal at home, believing in the end it's what's best for your body and your life. And we're all living fast and disconnected lives. So we're exhausted at the end of the day. There's low energy and lots of hungry people. And then we don't get given good cookbooks to make enjoyable homemade meals. So we're left to flounder around. And if you're a perfectionist or overwhelmed by how different your partner's taste is to yours, and we've talked about this in some of our previous episodes, or you're constantly cooking to meet to your partner's taste, but it's not your own, or every time you sit down to a meal, your partner rejects it or complains, it can be very tempting to give up and just go to that fast food joint for yourself around the corner, or just go off food altogether. That's kind of, you know, as I really sat down, I was like, this is the societal issue, and it's having a huge impact in our society, you know, in terms of early sexualization for our young people, lots of issues around consent that's coming out, miseducation, lacking maturity around what they're actually, what they're asking for from a partner, lack of really understanding consent, how to say no. There's all this stuff that's coming out of this piece, but really at the core of it is this dilemma that we're kind of wired to consume sexual content like we are kind of, like it's a hunger for food. But yet that's the equivalent, like there's fast food everywhere.
Right, and it's, as you say, it's free, and sometimes you don't even order it. I was on my Bible website the other day reading the Word of God, and up came a lingerie ad in the little ad box. I'm like, oh Lord help me, like can't even read the Bible anymore without something coming across my eyes.
So you know, what do we do?
That's a great question, because I hear that and I agree with it, but I'm also like, crap, like what can we do about that?
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know. And I see the consequences of that as well. I mean, we're talking about the porn user, we're talking about society, but then on the other side of that, the partner of someone who's using porn, the implications can be pretty massive for them in terms of low self-worth, their relationship to their bodies, feeling like they're always inadequate as compared to these fantasies or these unreal portrayals. And sometimes, you know, one of my clients was triple screening porn. I mean, how do you really compete
what does that
with three
mean?
Screens of porn going at the one
gosh,
time?
Right. Okay.
So how does like an ordinary sex life really compare to the variety and novelty that is being presented over, you know, in the other corner? And then, you know, not being sure, talking about intimacy and how sex is a space of really seeing another. How do you then, once you invite porn into this space, it's like, how do I know whether what you're doing or wanting to do is actually about me and our connection versus what you've seen or what you're kind of, it's like there's a third presence in the relationship. It's a tragic
distortion, really, is
and especially if you've discovered your partner doing it, and then you're actually dealing with betrayal and that whole space of you know, the disclosure and how it happened, and so it's another level of pain that you're then working with, that's almost more painful for people than the porn itself. Like I've met many women that say, I was fine, I think I'm okay, and understand why he would be looking at this, but the fact that he hadn't shared it with me and I discovered it, that's the biggest trauma, is the dishonesty that he was lying to my face, or that he'd never said this to me. That can be more painful than even the experience of discovering it. So it's huge, you know, because sex is such a vulnerable space. It's already got enough issues on its own, and then we you know, introduce this, and it's just a dilemma.
Duncan, you warned Monica that you might rile up. Like, this is obviously where are you coming from here? Why is it such a
Well,
a loaded conversation.
I just find it. Yeah, I mean, I find it incredibly unhelpful. I think one of the, like
sorry,
I don't
being pornography.
Yeah, pornography. Sorry, Jesus isn't. Like I don't think erotics, inappropriate sexuality. I don't know how to explain it, but like like you look in scripture and there's like a temple of Eros in Corinth that sits on the hill that is where the temple prostitutes are operating out of, right? So there's this kind of sense that like prostitution and sexuality is like rife in culture for a long time.
Yeah.
I think our biggest challenge is accessibility.
Yes.
Is that the notion is that pornography is effectively available in every room in this household on demand whenever one individual chooses to do it, and what you see over the course of time is the accessibility increasing, right? Like if you were in Corinth and you wanted to sleep with a prostitute, you got to walk up the hill.
Yeah.
Like the fact that you're walking up the hill puts you on display for a whole bunch of people. So you have to have a whole bunch of cultural and sociological awarenesses to say, yep, I'm going to go up that hill and get myself some sex, and realize that everyone's really aware of that. And then at some stage, you have to, order those dirty videos off a specific bookstore in town, which means you got to get in the car and drive over there, and then it gets to a place where you can get it from the news agency now, and they're in plastic covers, but you're still going to walk out of the place holding that thing to where we are now. And I think for me, that's my massive issue that I have no solve for, is that...
And that's the thing is, what's the solve?
Well, the solve is for the government to institute porn blockers on internet that comes into the country, which is like just a major invasion of privacy, but it's the solution. So there are narratives in certain, I'd have to look up the country, where they do that. They just block porn from a community.
Yeah.
And you go, yeah, that would be a great resolution for all of this, and just wind back accessibility. And so that's where I'm like I have to learn to function in a space where more often than not an individual has seen those images or watched those videos, and it's not ideal.
Yeah.
So we've talked about this before, is playing from a place where it's not ideal. It's not ideal for me personally, like I shared off air beforehand that, when I was doing youth pastoring, I would often share honest stories about the effect of pornography on my life and all the challenges to overcome that. And then all of a sudden I'd become the guy who you book for a porn talk. And it's like, I don't want to be the porn guy. Like, I don't want to go back and revisit this all the time, because the itch and the scratch of that remains, and learning to navigate that when you're depressed, when you're anxious, and all the cues that are there to help trigger a desire to want to go and do that. I don't want to be the guy who stands up the front and talks about it like it's done and it's sorted. And so that's the thing where I'm like, part of me just wants, the federal government to just institute a porn-free internet, and I will immediately subscribe to that.
Yeah.
Because I don't want it for my kids, and I'm going to get a little Pentecostal here, is that I think it's a generational sin that attaches. So I think it's something that Dad struggled with. I think it's something that I struggle with. And my greatest fear is with like a generational sin is that the impact that might have on my son or my daughter, and so I just flip and hate it. And I just realize that we have to navigate a society with it.
Yeah.
And I hate it because I understand the enjoyment it brings and the corruption that is.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, I really love how
I love a dirty burger.
Yeah, no, but I just want to say, like, seriously, I appreciate and respect you more for having what you just said because of how much you hate it, not because it's different from that's the naughty thing to do. I think what you're tapping into is the human destructiveness that comes from it, and that's the real hurt as a pastor. Is it's not just about, oh my gosh, I can't believe you just did that. It flips to, oh my gosh, you are just not having life to the full right now, and that grieves me.
Yeah, and I also think that, I mean, the good news is for a lot of the men that I interview these days, you know, I have to do a sexual history. I talk to them about masturbation and porn, and fewer and fewer guys are saying, these are not Christian guys, these are just general, are realizing that what you're saying is true and the way this is impacting negatively on them. It's the same as this health movement.
Yeah.
You know, that people really are, yes, there's still fast food, but people really are concerned about their health. Everyone's got these little trackers, and people that are really serious about their health and well-being are starting to lean in and be like, no, absolutely not. And so I'd say about 50% of the guys this week that I've seen are all off it, and knowing that that's not helping them in their sex life, that they're not getting the living life to the full, like experiencing sex with their partner, being fully attentive, they're aware of all the side effects of that, they're naturally pulling off, or they're just not going there. And it's quite surprising to me because there's no religious reason for them, there's no moral framework, but it's actually just in the pure knowledge of how it's impacting or has impacted on them that is enough of a movement for them to push them in another direction. So it may not even be needing this kind of government control. I think from within, if we can really zone in on how people are better and more sexual, actually, like we can live into our sexuality. I think porn is anti-sexual. It's not that it's too sexual for Christians. It's actually anti-sexual, and it's not what sex is about, and it's not eroticism, and it's not this. It lacks all of those things. It lacks sensuality. It lacks connection and intimacy and consent and respect and all those things that make sex what it is. It's lacking that. And it was really interesting, another piece, I follow a Mormon sexologist. Her name's Jennifer Finlayson-Fife, and I love her. I think she's had some amazing things to say, but she says that porn also impacts on maturity, like people being able to grow into, and something you were saying, Duncan, about, you know, walking up to the temple and having to kind of get sex that way was sort of in and of itself a courageous move. She's saying that when you don't have to do that, you're getting sex almost through, in this covert way, you're able to, there's an expression of manhood, but without any risk or courage. She says there's sexual fulfillment without relationship or sacrifice. There's intimacy without vulnerability. There's passion, but no connection. There's power, but no responsibility. And there's comfort without making space for another. So it's all of these things that really sex forces you into when you're actually out there in the real world engaging, and the reward is sex, right? And it forces growth. It forces boys to grow into men by kind of making these kind of courageous moves. And they don't have to do that
anymore. You're sounding so much like a John Eldridge book, right?
Oh, really? But I don't know. This is what she says, and I think there's a point there as well around how it's shrinking people. Rather than...
I mean, I got a lot of respect for the dude who walks up the hill to get sex. Is that what you're saying is that he's willing to at least stand up and say, yep, that's what I want to do.
I own what I'm doing.
I own what I'm doing. And what we've created is a system now where there's just zero accountability and zero courage to do any of it. You know, I think, I'm in a mixed martial arts gym, and so like one of the things I try and do is just surround myself with a bunch of non-Christians who are dealing with life. And so I will often have a side of mat counselling appointment about something random. And a buddy of mine came up to me when I was in the States one day and says, hey, listen, my wife's going out of town for this month-long conference. Can I ask you a question? I'm like, yeah, sure, man. What's the question? He's like, well, she's going away and she's really upset that I'm going to look at some pornography while she's away. But like, she's out of town, so we can't be physically intimate. So I don't understand why she's frustrated that I'm going to look at some porn, to pleasure myself. And I said, no, I totally get it. I'm like, how much porn is she allowed to look at while she's at the conference? so that she can pleasure herself. And he was like, super offended. He's like, well, no, it's so that I can, and I was like, well, it's not fair because kind of there's a mutuality to sexuality and your wife's away from you and she's going to have similar desires and urges. So surely she's allowed to tee off on whatever she wants to watch in that space as well. He was like, oh, that's not fair. And I said, well, then I guess it plays both ways. And so we had this long, protracted conversation where his understanding of sexuality with his partner kind of grew. And suddenly he was like, oh, yeah, so that's not really a good thing. I'm like, yeah. And imagine if you just went a month without doing it, you just kind of took a season off from each other and committed to not pleasuring yourself. I wonder if it would be better when you did come together at the end of that, And so he was like, you're a lunatic. Anyway, went away, said it to his wife, and then a month later came back. He's like, best sex of my life, I just had last night. And I just thought, like, there's this whole instant gratification and delayed gratification that we just miss. Sometimes the delay in the gratification is really good. Like, like I do the same with a whole bunch of guys who are living together and sleeping together and they want to get married and they just really like how I do weddings. And I say, why don't you just move into a separate bedroom for 3 months? And it always ticks off the man. And the wife's like, yeah, well, I think we could do that. Because I think that there's an imbalance of discipline too. Like one of the things that happens through pornography is that you just get super ill-disciplined as a guy.
And instant gratification.
And girls don't track like that. And so you get this separation and these women are like, yeah, 5 months, not a problem. I love that. I think could be really great, and then you get this husband who like for 5 months is just pissed at me. Like, how dare you? And then that wedding week post the wedding, he's like, best ever, great decision done. Wow. Like super, super awesome. And it's like, yeah, you're learning the art of discipline and delayed gratification. And as a result of that, because you've kind of championed your way into this union together, you're like, yeah, it just got a lot better. And so I think that's all part of the stuff that I struggle with this conversation is just like, you just miss all of that. And then you have to relearn all those pathways because you've created this whole other architecture that's really broken. And then when you're learning the new ones, it gets worse before it gets better because you've got to go on that journey. I'm not asking any questions. I'm just...
Well, let me make an observation culturally that I think is interesting as we think about this as Christians. Because with the rise of pornography, by my assessment, has come a public criticism of purity culture within the church. So, I mean, the classic poster boy for this deconstruction is Joshua Harris, who wrote I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Actually, my first introduction to I didn't know the term purity culture at the time, but I remember his book, Not Even a Hint, reading that as a young adult, maybe late teens. And he's come out and he's actually gone as far as apologizing for his books and the harm that has caused. And I guess that, and I should say, has seemingly renounced his faith in Jesus altogether, as well as that.
And his wife is now writing books about the damaging effects of that. Sorry, his ex-wife is now writing books about the damaging effects of all of that.
But I guess, so on the one hand, we've had this rise of pornography coincide within Christian thought of we can't be so simplistic as to just go stop it. And we've spoken about the kind of stop it movement in previous episodes. I guess within that observation, for me, the $1 million question is the balance between grace and forgiveness while also taking our sin seriously. Like in my experience, I don't think we have given men and women in the church enough safety to confess pornography addictions or even pornography use. And at the same time, I also understand the fear and trepidation around that, because when are we just giving into licentiousness and going, oh, it's too hard, I understand, it's available everywhere, and so you're only human. So, yeah, the tension between understanding and compassion and grieving sin. I don't know where the line is, and it's so complicated. So I guess my question for you, Monica, is whether you've got any thought, maybe in a therapeutic space, around how do you create safe spaces that actually promote human growth? Because my assumption is that giving no space to acknowledge it, confess it, and grow through it isn't the answer either.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think that, like, you know, you don't want to get to a place where it's like, you know, well, God will forgive me, and, you know, that passage, like, do
Romans
I sin?
6,
Yeah, do I sin so that grace can abound more?
Certainly
so
not.
You don't want that piece, and this idea of, as you say, everyone's doing it, so it's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
It's clearly overwhelming and no one has a solution.
Yeah.
But then you don't want to be kind of beaten over the head with your sin, drop you into shame. Because I actually think the problem with both of those positions is that they're static positions.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm staying here, and one is almost a grandiose one of like, God will deal with it, and the other is like drop down in shame. Well, they're both static. They're both immobile places of almost defeat. Whereas I actually think that the point of all this is for us to, like Adam and Eve, step out from behind the bushes and walk with God. And to be moving, always moving, you know, and even if that means kind of this, you know, this relationships generally are this process of harmony, disharmony, and repair. And I don't think our relationship with God is any different there in terms of, yes, we're this new identity, yet we still screw up, and we're still called to confess and come close. And really that's where transformation happens, is in that constant cycle.
Yeah.
And if we're not participating in that cycle, and we're just like stuck in this one up, one down, helpless defeat of hiding in some form, then there's no transformation or growth. It is, in my opinion, in like what I've witnessed. Where it's the people that are wrestling, they're moving, they're thinking, they're growing, they're stuffing up, they're coming back to God, they're, you know, asking God, they're grappling. That every time they fail, every cycle that they're kind of coming back to, they're learning, and they're better, and they're stronger, and that's where I see that transformation. So I think our encouragement there is both, and like grace and forgiveness, and a not pulling away from truth, so that truth and love together, but also an encouragement for movement and mobility, and to constantly wrestle.
And as I hear you say that, my thought is we need safe spaces to create that.
Exactly.
Because my default reaction to that is that's not just between an individual and God. That's an individual and God in the context of a community of accountability, support, mercy, rebuke at times.
Yes.
But we don't, at least in my experience, I have not been in a church that has had truth. I've been in men's groups that have done it, and maybe that's just the right expression to do it. But it requires a lot of trust and a lot of safety to go, I may be corrected, but I won't be condemned.
Yes.
And in our Christian communities, that's not always easy to differentiate between.
Yes, that's right. And even just the idea of rebuking one another in love is such a foreign concept. I mean, I literally was talking about this in my Bible study the other night. When was the last time any of us was actually rebuked, you know? And how did that go? And how did you receive that? And in a cancel culture that we live in right now, where you're not even allowed to say the wrong thing because you'll be cancelled. How do we go with that in churches? And I guess it also comes back to the idea of anyone having truth on anything is always a question, like as well. So even whether people are going to trust your word or the rebuke, or it's just it's a really interesting concept of how we hold each other accountable as a collective community. To be able to have these conversations and to move through this harmony, disharmony, repair, and to encourage each other to keep going through.
And I like that, because otherwise, if you don't do it, you're static in one end of the extreme or another. Yeah. And I think the other thing for me, and Duncan, I don't know what you'd say about this. I think my hypothesis is there's a huge hidden majority of pastors who are using pornography. We talk about Christians, but do pastors have a safe place to explore this? And is their job on the line if they do disclose it? Like, I think that's another element to this conversation that feels really edgy, is for those in vocational ministry. Like, you just run the maths and you go, there must be a lot of people in vocational ministry who are using pornography. And
well, they've got stats to back that up. Yeah. That's true.
But you've got so much of your identity on the line, not just in your marriage, but you've got your career, your calling. It's just like another level of pressure and another level of unsafety to disclose. And I'm just voicing that, not knowing what to do about it, but just to voice that reality. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
I was at a men's conference in the States, and they did a audit of the internet before they did the event, and they came in and they announced that 90% of the websites looked up were pornography, and it was predominantly dominated by pastors in that particular hotel. And you could have heard a pin drop in the room.
Wow.
When they said that. And I just thought, I mean, it's a abrasive way to start, and it certainly created a deep sense of uncomfortability in the room when you're confronted with sin that exists in your life. I think a lot of pastors' job depends on their purity.
Yes, that's what I'm saying, yeah.
So there's a lot of scaredness about the revelation. I don't know how to word that right, but like I've got a minimum sexual standards that I have to live by, that is designated by the movement that I work under, and it's pretty full on. Mm-hmm. So when you create an environment like that, it's very hard for a pastor to then say, I struggle with this.
Yeah.
I've got a big issue with this. And that then means that they just hide it because they don't have any space to talk about. One of the things we do, which is similar to your harmony, disharmony circle, is we do like see, sacrifice, celebrate. So the notion is see the places that God is working in you and through you, and then sacrifice so that he might bring that to fruition, and then celebrate those places where God has been at work in really powerful ways. And I find that that's a healthy framework for us, even when we have conversations like this about pornography at churches, kind of see the places where you're most likely to give in to those urges. And where are the places that God could intersect with that and be at work in that? And then have a willingness to address those. Put stuff in place that allows you to push into a relationship with God. Because I don't know what you were talking about, whether this is like root sin or parent sin, whatever the language is you use, but like oftentimes it's a coping mechanism. It's a response to low self-worth, like it's like I beat myself up by looking at this stuff. And so there's like a root issue, because not everyone's looking at porn for the same reason.
Yeah.
And so unpacking that is really important. Well, why is it? Sometimes it's not, it's a gratification that's because of this. And so finding a place where Jesus is the redeeming force for the root issue, not for the symptom of why you're doing it, is a deeper conversation.
Yeah,
and that's where ministers can go in with. That's the power of the theology coming and meeting with that sexuality, is sort of understanding really what's at the core root and how does Jesus answer that. How is he the kind of how does he bring redemption to that space? And I think that's really interesting. You said something about ministers being sexually pure. Is it that we also get very narrow in our idea of what is purity even possible? I mean, you look at a woman in a lustful way, and that's adultery in God's world. So this idea of purity, coming back from this purity culture, that somehow abstinence, and it means that there are people in the church that are pure and people that are impure on this front, is a really unhelpful kind of duality, because the reality is that it's very hard for any of us to be sexually pure if that's the standard. And so how we even And what that also does is it sort of creates this us and them shame.
Yes.
Kind of, and that was exactly the purity culture issue as
Yes.
well. Of if you're impure, then somehow you're of less worth to God. You're like the rose of the petal that's fallen off your chewing gum or whatever it was.
The Velcro that's been,
you know, all of these awful metaphors for lack of worth, which is totally unbiblical because God says you are all impure. You all fall short of this. And actually, you're all in need of redemption in this way because my standards are like way up here. It's not just porn. It's like, how did you look at this person?
Yeah. How did you love your neighbor?
How did you know? And
which is back to episode 1 of
the
notion of singleness is the pursuit of Christ as our redeeming purity is the highest calling for sexuality, right? Like, Hosea and Gomer's notion is a representation of Yahweh with his church, which we see also in Ezekiel. And it's like Tony Campolo used to say, the church is a whore and she is my mum, which was charged. It's still charged today. But it's deeply broken and the only person who can bring it healing is Jesus. And his notion is accurate. And so you are 100% true. Nobody is pure, not even one. Nobody is sexually pure, not even one, apart from Christ alone. And so the pursuit of Christ is the hardest thing to champion when the accessibility of porn is so prevalent. You know, like
it makes me wonder, and please don't hold me to this. I don't know if I agree with what I'm about to say yet, but verbally processing that, it makes me wonder whether should the requirement for pastors not be what we've historically called purity, but should the requirement be a commitment to accountability? You know what I mean? So you're actually not taking the lead on whether or not you've looked at porn in the last year. It's whether or not you've taken it so seriously that it grieves you and you care about it. Now, I don't know if I'm not saying that definitively, but that's just one thing that this conversation makes me think. It's not actually that Monica's phone's ringing, by the way. So,
just go.
You know, I guess put another way, I've always said that Jesus doesn't want our perfection; he wants our humility. And so maybe it's more about that, and how that plays into what we expect of our pastors and of ourselves as Christians generally. What is the goal here? Of course, in a perfect world, it's no porn. That's not really what we're facing in our present moment.
I think
culturally. Yeah, but I don't want to say that definitively because I don't want to give up on that fight at the same time. So it's an idea that I'm proposing that I need to think through, and I'm encouraging other people to think through.
The highest pursuit of a pastor is the same as the highest pursuit of any person, which is the willingness to be with God. And what we often do is mistake that for doing the work of God. So pastoral leadership pushes you towards doing Jesus things, but our ultimate determination should be the pursuit of being with Christ. And so everything that you see in terms of accountability and purity is all about doing. And what we don't do is address the root issue, which is the longing to be with Christ. You know, one of the things I'm most aware of in my own personal life as a result of our 4 conversations, Monica, is unpacking for me personally whether or not I have a healthy understanding of sexuality in light of a pursuit of God. Or do I just really delight in sex for the sake of sex? That's not healthy, you know? And so that's where I've been most challenged as I listen to this, is that the notion of an individual who pushes towards pornography over Jesus, what is it? What is the question that you're missing about Jesus that I can encourage you to push towards him? You know, we don't clean your dirty cup by scooping out the dirty bits. We pour clean water in until it's overflowing and it washes out the dirty bits. That's the notion of being with Christ. The deeper we long to be in his presence, the more likely we are not to be engaging in those things. You know, I just think like these guys are struggling with it in the New Testament. They're rock stars at some stage, you know, and then they're bad boys at other places, and there's women that like both of those people, you know, and so I'm just, again, Monica's misogynistic Duncan here, but they've got to grapple with all of that, right? When does Mary stop?
Here we go again.
When does Mary stop hooking? Is it her first encounter with Jesus? Is she 3 weeks into the Bible study series?
Your point is that discipleship can be a messy process.
That's right. And that's where I think we see this beauty in Jesus, is he's just loving Mary Magdalene for Mary Magdalene. And as part of the process of apprenticing, she figures it out, right? Oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing this.
Sorry.
Yeah, go.
I was just going to start to wrap up this episode and wrap up our 4 episodes with Monica. If we come back to sexology as a discipline and being a Christian, I guess on an umbrella level, how does being a follower of Jesus impact the way you approach sexology as a concept and as a practitioner of that discipline?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, for a start, and sort of touching on what you were saying, Duncan, it matters how we understand sexuality, when you really understand the kind of profound significance of it. And I think it's both and. It's the pleasure and the physiological joy of being embodied, and the way God made us, and the celebration of that, and the thankfulness of that, and pointing that back to God, and the recognition and reminder that this is actually what we have to look forward to with God, that the feelings that we're feeling here is just a small image of the desire God has for us and of what we have in Him. I think if we can hold that in sort of tension, it means that my work matters, because if people are disconnected from that vision, if Satan's somehow gotten there to muddle this vision for people, and it's actually a cause of shame and despair and hiding, then they're missing out on really what they've got in Jesus. They're really kind of being disconnected from this element, and I think that's sad, and it's something that kind of motivates me. I think also the other piece is that it gives me a moral framework. So working as a sexologist with a Christian foundation, I'm very open about that. Even with my clients that are not Christian, they're aware that I am. Gives me a framework which I think is in a discipline that is very slippery, where there's not very much, like I have a true north, and I need to have a true north if I feel like I'm actually trying to process whether I'm helping people, you know, and in a world that says follow your desires, all desires are good and right, and anything that comes from within, go for it. It comes out of that comes a Christian space that says no, actually not all desires from the heart are good and right, and sometimes there is this kind of moral good and bad and right and wrong, and it helps to lead me then in knowing what I'm going after. And I think the scriptures also really do give me a grounded ability to sort of make sense of even lots of aspects of psychology, which is really encouraging, because like I said, God made us, and of course good psychology is going to align with that. So it's sort of, as I read the scripture and I see alignment, I'm like, oh yeah, this is going to work really well as a framework. So it's kind of exciting to be on that. And I think also being Christian and a sexologist is so wonderful, because it takes the pressure off me feeling like the healing is all mine. You know, that I can go into that, and I think there is pressure. People are paying you to get better, right? And you can really feel the pressure of that. And when you know at the end of the day that you can lift this up in prayer and say, you know what, God, that you know these people more than me, you love them more than me. And you can work through me despite what I've just done or because of what I've done. It's so freeing, both for me and the client, to know that eventually healing comes from beyond me. So there, I would say that it's a very essential part of my work is having that faith as I go along.
And as you say, you walk, I mean, I think you said you walk a fine line is how you put it, perhaps. And that's been what has always struck me about you since I've got to know you, is you walk a road less traveled in terms of trying to work out sexology best practice and discipleship best practice all in one and the same. And whenever we step into mess like that, we're bound to get it wrong sometimes. And yet
Absolutely.
you also have that true north, as you say. So I just want to affirm you in that and say have a lot of respect for you that you do that with the utmost of integrity, I believe. And so I just want to say, keep going in that. And I also just want to say we need more of that. So I guess my final question would be, if there are followers of Jesus listening and you've piqued an interest in them, and we need more monikers, we need more sexologists, coming back to the first episode, what does that actually look like? How do you get into what you are now doing?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because I think we do need better pathways there, actually. I think if you want to get accredited, so I'm sort of accredited through the Society of Australian Sexologists, you do need a kind of master's level degree. So they can either do that through the University of Sydney or the University of Curtin.
In sexology, is that the name of the degree?
Yeah, they've got different names, but they're sexual specialties.
Okay.
So yeah, like I said, the one at University of Sydney is, I think, Masters of Sexual and Reproductive Health, and then you have different disciplines within like majors that you can do. And that will give you the credibility and also a really good foundational level for the medical side of sexology as well, because what we've been talking about the psychological side, but there is this whole other world of which of this is medical, and an actual physiological issue here. But I think there's a lot of scope there for people that are already practicing in the counselling and psychology realm to kind of extend their learning into this space, and that would be something I would really encourage if you're a Christian and already in this work. How do you start
this work being counselling generally?
Yeah, that's right. Counselling and even coaching and working with people to help them in their lives. Then it's like, what are those courses that are going to sort of help you continue to grow in particularly in this realm? Because I feel like so many clients come to me and say, I love my psychologist, I love my counsellor, but felt like I couldn't go there with them. Or they didn't ask about it. Or there was this big elephant in the room. Love that. I can't wait to get that in there.
You're on the right podcast,
That we could not we just knew and that's because deep down the therapist doesn't know the language either and doesn't know how to speak into that. And so even just doing a few basic courses around working in that space and getting comfortable and being able to ask the right questions and open up that conversation and have referral pathways for the specializations that you need. I think that's really good too. And there's so much out there at the minute on podcasts and books. There's new books coming out all the time that I think, and even approaches that you can kind of integrate into this space that are really helpful, like that somatic-based work, that embodied processing is wonderful. And I've loved relational life therapy. It's a particular approach that's relationship based, but you can really use that within the sexology space. There's internal family systems, so it's like working with parts of people, so you can work with the part of you that wants to be sexual, or so there's so many interesting kind of ways you can integrate probably what you already know, but extending it into the sexual space. So I'd really encourage people to think about doing that, because we need more people that are just really able to step in there.
Thank you. Big thank you to you for everything. So much wisdom. The least we can do to repay you is give you ample platform to give your own business a shout out. So tell us a little bit more about Reconceived. Where do you do it? Who's it for? How do they get in touch with you? Yeah,
sure. So I'm just I work both in telehealth, but also in person. I've got some offices in Willoughby, Sydney. I don't know where you're listening in from. And I work with all of those issues that we discussed in the first episode. And beyond, I'm not particularly afraid to go anywhere really, because all I'm doing is holding that space and, don't sometimes even not, I need to know all the answers. It's just about kind of unpacking that. And so that's and I've got a website. It's www.reconceived.com.au. It was called that because I like the idea of people reconceiving sex, like kind of moving away from old frames and into a new space of sexual wellness. And also I work with a lot of clients that are trying to conceive and were struggling with their sex life as a result. So when I initially came up with the name, it was around that as well. But now I've definitely expanded into other areas. So reach out. You can book online, jump on and reach out, and even email me. And as you can hear, Monica's also a very gifted speaker, and that's where I first met her, was as a keynote at a conference. And so
I haven't come to you as a client, but I've certainly seen you do your thing in the public speaking space, and I know you have a heart for training pastors and equipping churches as well. So
Yes.
Monica is a gift to the kingdom of God, and I would thoroughly encourage you to get in touch with her, whether you're a client or you're a pastor wanting to know more, because I think she can bless you greatly. Thank you so much for coming on. We are thoroughly blessed for it. But I'm going to throw to the radio professional to do the formal rounding out.
Monica, thanks for coming on the show. I'm now going to have a cold shower and a long conversation with my wife.
Thank you. Enjoy.
Thank you so much.
Oh, no, that's